Here we go. It's the System Failure Podcast, number 35. Wow, how's it going, Nate?
Hey, Brian, number 35. We're coming to you live on this Mother's Day of 2024. And the weather really is starting to turn around up here in Maine anyways. I feel like the rest of the country probably got their spring already, but up here in Maine, where it's one of the most northern states, so it's the last to arrive. And it's always exhilarating when you can finally enjoy going outside without a jacket on. It has been like October since the last time we could do that. So always nice to arrive at Mother's Day. That and the NHL playoffs are how you know it's springtime and the buds are on the trees, huh?
Well, I was walking back from the Whole Foods and I was crazily sweaty and I had to change shirts.
Wow.
So
yeah. All right. Well, yeah,
it's happening.
That'll tell you that we officially made it. It's like 2 weeks, I guess, till Memorial Day weekend, which is usually the traditional kickoff to summertime. And also, unfortunately, usually it's rainy on Memorial Day weekend for whatever reason. We've had a streak of like 3 years where the weather on Memorial Day weekend's been anything but hospitable. But that's okay.
Well, I think the weather in Maine in general, the pattern is that it rains all summer, basically, with a few sunny days. Like we've become like, Seattle East, right?
I guess, yeah. It definitely seems like it's been rainier and more cloudy and gloomy and less bright and sunny. But we also live right on the coast. And so I think that if you live on the water, you have this effect where you have mild air from the water, from the ocean, that mixes with the drier air from the land. And so you get a lot of weather patterns right here. You know, if you strain your neck looking at your apartment window here, Brian, up on the 6th floor, you can almost see the Atlantic Ocean through some of the buildings. So we really are within walking distance of the Atlantic Ocean. So I think that Portland maybe is a little bit different than the rest of the state. When you look at our local news sources, there's always like the inland forecast and then the coastal forecast. They have one for each. They kind of put them into two buckets like that because things just really are different along the coast. So I don't know. Do you think that the Inland Empire is also having gloomy, cloudy summers?
I probably.
Yeah.
I just remember, like in the second grade, we got like a Time for Kids talking about El Nino, and there's
Time for Kids. What's that like a special?
Well, it's the Time magazine for kids.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And like El Nino and La Nina are a thing, but nobody talks about those anymore. Just Greta Thunberg.
Yeah. Well, I never know what to make on the climate thing. Like, on the one hand, it's clear that the capitalist system of production will assimilate the entire biomass and turn it into profit at some point, and that cannot be good for the environment. And that all the fish have disappeared, and so there's definitely some kind of ecological fallout going on. But then there's also, you can pull up on YouTube an old 1970s scientific bulletin warning about the dangers of global cooling, and you've got Leonard Nimoy, the voice of Mr. Spock, giving these just dire, by a certain year, we're going to be frozen. The entire Earth will be a frozen wasteland if we don't do something about our polluting. But now it's all now, according to Al Gore's 2001 movie, An Inconvenient Truth, Florida's supposed to be underwater by 2020. And it's just, I don't know. I don't think it's. I can't help but notice that the sandwich board that says the end of the world. It's like it's what system failure is all about. Ringing the bell and prophecies of doom and all that. But I don't know if the climate. But then there's also the part of the science cult or religion that has it has its mirrors in old time Christianity. And so there's like the apocalyptic doom-saying part of Christianity that's made its way into the cult of science. And so I have no idea what to make of it. It doesn't seem like past projections like Al Gore's famous 2020, Florida will be underwater, have come true at all. But it also is completely logical to me that a system that requires infinite growth in a context of limited resources is going to cause some kind of an ecological disaster. So who knows? But the old timers in Maine definitely talk about the winters being so cold that you could walk out to Peaks Island across Portland Harbor. Portland Harbor would freeze to where you could walk out to Peaks Island, and that just would never happen now. It just never gets that cold. We don't get that much snow here along the coast. So,
well, I think the environmentalism ends up being a perfect wedge issue. Because on the one hand, obviously polluting is not good, and on the other hand, Florida is not underwater, And it doesn't seem like society is about to end as a result of climate change. So it's just another one for our, our reptilian overlords to use against us here to divide and conquer.
Yeah, it's like the abortion issue. Right, there's the level on which some people who might have needed to get an abortion now won't be able to get one because of this Roe v. Wade business, and that's a big tragedy. So we should vote blue no matter who, But then there's another layer to that cake where, President Obama ran on codifying abortion in 2008, and he had supermajority in the Senate and had the House, and of course had the presidency, and did nothing on abortion because it's an important political football, because it's a perfect political cul-de-sac. Both sides are making. You can understand both sides of the equation. It just depends on which pair of glasses you're wearing, and so it just makes for this perfect political football that can be played infinitely, and never resolved. And you can just drive people to the polls, you can drive people to the polls without making any sort of economic concession in their lives, which is what we really need, right? The great slider between the values, the one value of the public good and the other value of corporate profits is all the way. It's like slammed hard into the corporate profit side. We've got no balance there. But the abortion issue will drive people to the polls without ever having to talk about possibly moving the slider so that it's not hard to the so it's not all the way to steering towards corporate profit, and instead is balancing corporate profit with this public good. We don't want any consideration on that front. So yeah, maybe that's why the climate change issue is so valuable, because you can get people arguing endlessly, and no one's talking about the 99% versus the 1%, or the bank bailouts, or quantitative easing, or any of the insider trading going on, or all of the stock buybacks, and just the endless corrupt practices, mortgage-backed securities, things like that. So, yeah, I think that's got to be it, right? It's not that the issue is useful. It's not that the point is that the issue can't be easily resolved, and that's what makes it so useful, eh?
Yeah, well, it's hard not to be nostalgic for the pre-COVID times. I mean, it seemed crazy at the time, what with the economic catastrophe of the Wall Street collapse, aught 8 or aught 9, and the post 9/11 era with these crazy misadventures in the Middle East. But, we used to have, season passes to, Universal Studios for $125. And,
unbelievable.
I used to get 2 Bruins tickets for $90 on eBay. And this was before they redesigned the Garden and made all the seats 2 inches smaller.
You remember the 1750 Bruins tickets? You go to for the regular season. You were talking about the playoffs there, but for the regular season, you get those sweet 1750 tickets.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's the cheapest seats, $100 now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, there's been a lot more turns of the screw since 2019. No question about that. Do you remember the repo chaos in the late months of 2019 leading into 2020? See, I think that the quantitative easing, right? So people talk about, you remember 2008, right? And then there was the TARP bailouts where we just gave money to these businesses, literally just here's some money, the $750 billion, of TARP money. And when you bring that up, people say, you'll hear the canard about how that money's been paid back, but $750 billion is peanuts. That's not at all the real number. Well, first of all, Sheila Baird, who headed up the FDIC during the heady days of 2008, had this suggestion. She's like, we're giving so much money to Citibank, we should nationalize them. We've given them enough money to have a majority stake in the. Of course, that's not what the political apparatchiks have been dispatched to Capitol Hill to do. They're not there to hand these giant means of production over into public hands. They're there to protect the people who own, the tiny minority who own these means of production. So, of course, Sheila Bair was not popular for that suggestion. But this is just the $750 billion in TARP bailout money, right? That Ford famously didn't take it, and the other automakers eventually had to pay it back with interest. So it's a good deal for the tax. That is not what we're talking about when we're talking about corporate. We're talking about quantitative easing, where the Fed is buying the loans off their balance sheet at face value instead of writing those loans down to the actual value of the people who owe that money to actually pay it. Obviously, the Mud People scandal from Wells Fargo comes readily to mind, where they signed up a bunch of poor people for variable interest rate mortgages. Turned out those mortgages couldn't be paid, And there were all of these derivatives that were, like side bets placed on these mortgages. They got, obviously the mortgages got bundled and then turned into mortgage-backed securities. And then there was credit default swaps, which were insurance policies on those mortgage-backed securities, just causing a total disaster on Wall Street. And so to keep the system going, we just paid the banks face value for those loans versus writing them down to the actual ability of the poor people who Wells Fargo signed up for these shoddy loans to pay. And that's just been going on, just tens of billions of dollars a month walking out the door for, 15 years now? We're at like the 16-year mark since the 2008 financial crisis. And so that has a lot to do with when that process started to go bump in the night in late 2019 when the overnight repo rate started to spike and just go haywire. The Federal Reserve, their only thing that they do is they target interest rates, and typically they target interest rates by adjusting the reserve requirements at the banks. Right now, the repo rate, if you're a big bank in New York City and I'm a big bank in New York City, the repo rate is I have this much in let's say I have $1 trillion in deposits. I have to, the Federal Reserve will say, well, you have to have 10% of that in cash on hand. So every day, some of my depositors will take out money and other of my depositors will put in money, and I'll true up my books and I'll decide, okay, so for tonight, in order to make that 10% reserve requirement, do I need money from another bank or do I loan money from another bank? And then you and I would set up you might need money and I might have money, and we would set up some kind of an overnight transaction. And the Fed adjusts reserve requirements to target that rate. That's principally how they function. Open market operations was like their break glass in case of emergency, where they go out in the open market and start buying printing money and buying treasury bonds with it to affect bond prices. But they've been doing that nonstop since 2008. But before 2008, this was the way that they operated. They adjust reserve requirements. That affects the overnight rate, and that's how the Fed, they set a rate target, and that's how they hone in on that rate target by adjusting reserve requirements. And of course, in 2019, something broke in the plumbing of the financial system. You can find all kinds of Wall Street Journal articles about it from November, and so the Fed had to get in there, and try to fix that situation as best they could by introducing money to it or by dropping reserve requirements or whatever needed to happen. So, but anyway, that whole the burp in the overnight repo rates was caused because the Fed in the fall of 2019 decided to try to unwind their balance sheet. That is to say, all of the quantitative easing they've been doing every single month since 2008, they decided to just do a little bit less of it each month and a little bit less of it, trying to unwind that, and that caused the repo window to blow up. So they had to go right back to buying all of those bonds, and they've been at it ever since. And obviously, we all know that the amount of money introduced to the economy in 2020 and in 2021 was a huge amount of money, right? I just think we had to move into a fully synthetic economy in 2020 because things were already going wrong in 2019. I think COVID response had a lot to do with the fact that we're still dealing with 2008 and its aftermath. Sorry, you were about to say?
It's like 70% of the money ever printed was printed in the COVID era.
Yeah, you have to be careful with that one because in the middle of the COVID era, the Fed redefined what M2, the M2 money supply to which you were referring, they changed the definition. So that factors in. I'm not quite sure how much, but there was a lot of rabbits and hats and magic wands during the COVID era at the Fed. And you're right. Like a huge amount of the U.S. dollars in existence were generated like post 2020 and beyond. Absolutely wild. So why were we talking about Aught 8? I now can't remember how we got on this topic.
Well, we're having nostalgia for the...
the pre-COVID era before things went really crazy. Yeah.
But I think, at least in the current era, you've got to be excited. Like, we weren't really making any headway on, the Israel-Palestine issue. And now it's, like, actually coming to a head. Yeah,
I remember seeing, and this should lead us into Roger Waters' recent video. I remember you had got me going to these Roger concerts in the late aughts. And in, like, 2010, Roger came to Boston. And we went to the Brian's not going to miss out on a Roger concert if he's coming within 100 miles. And there was like a big truck saying that Roger was an anti-Semite, which I didn't really know much about the Palestine issue at the time, but it seemed odd, right? Because Roger seems like at least his public persona is of this. He has these. Well, he's got in those days he had a song in his act called "Leaving Beirut," all about how he had gone to Lebanon and had had his interaction with these Arab people during the darkest days of the conflict in Lebanon in the 80s, and then but the Arab people had been impeccably hospitable to him, and it had changed the young English, Roger Waters, the young English lad traveling the world. It had changed his perception of what was going on in the Middle East, and so
in the 2010 was the Wall tour, right? And so literally the only thing that he says about Israel in the whole tour is during Goodbye Blue Sky, the B-52s. Well, they drop a bunch of logos out of their, the bomb holder, and one of the logos is a Star of David, but there's also the crescent moon for Islam and some crosses for Christianity and Shell oil signs,
Mercedes-Benz,
so that's literally the only thing. And then back in that Dark Side of the Moon tour from '06 to '07 or so. Yeah, that Leaving Beirut song, doesn't say. I mean, they talked about the might of the Christian right and whatnot, and he went after. Was it Tony Blair?
Yeah. And George W. in that song.
And there's just that truck with a big TV screen on a flatbed or whatever going around saying how Roger's an anti-Semite.
Right. Yeah.
It is.
He's an honorary member of the Third Reich. Basically, no daylight between Roger and Hitler. You listen to his songs, it doesn't seem possible.
Well, it gets into why the conflict is not going to ever be resolved, and Gad Saad was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he was throwing out the platitude about how if the Palestinians laid down their arms, there'd be peace, tomorrow, and then if the Israelis laid down their arms, there would be, a mass wipeout of all the Jews, right? And there is the thing where Netanyahu props up Hamas because he doesn't actually want a two-state solution. And it's just a really unconvincing argument because it seems like people hate all the Palestinians. Well, it's just crazy that they're driving this truck around in front of Roger, right? I mean, that's just Roger doesn't. He just has this message of peace or whatever. He's not saying calling Roger an anti-Semite. It's really crazy, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is that people can't untangle their critique. Because the thing is, there is real anti-Semitism, and then there is the actual critique of Israel, right? And people can't untangle the two knots, and because of that, there's never going to be peace, right? And I think the same thing is true, where there's the meaningful critique of Hamas, and then there's just the hate of Hamas and Palestinians also.
Yeah. See, that's why I didn't make it more than 5 minutes into the Gad Saad appearance on the JRE recently. Because he said, is he at McGill University in Montreal? I can't remember where Gad Saad is a professor at, but he said he's because of rampant anti-Semitism, people like me can't go on campus. And Rogan double clicks. He's like, you can't go on campus? And he's like, once or twice I decided not to go on campus. What turned out to be the real story. But there's a part of this where there's a thing where when resources are constrained, people will turn on their neighbors, and then when someone's babies aren't going to get enough food, right? When you start to get this idea that there's a scarcity of resources people will when people start to feel that not everyone's babies are going to get to eat, then you start excluding other people's babies, and you have to seize on some kind of superficial, whatever it might be, maybe the religion or the skin color or something like this. So a context of winnowing resources definitely will stoke any kind of division, any kind so anytime you have the investment class taking the investment class seizing their slice of the pie through legal contracts, through debt. And if the pie isn't growing, then the lot of the working class, then it's acquisition by dispossession, as far as the 1% in their financial relationship to the rest of us. So anytime you have resources dwindling, you're going to have spikes in every kind of sectarian or racial or religious strife. And so I would expect an uptick in anti-Semitism based on that. But then there's also the thing where you can get in the newspaper. If you're a high school kid, you can just go to the playground in the middle school and carve a swastika on the playground. Just that's all you have to do. And then now there's a big thing in the newspaper, and it's anti-Semitism has come to a small hamlet in Maine, and so you can get a huge reaction because we're looking for anti-Semitism, right? So many of our media outlets have Jewish owners, and so many of the there's a differential between how different kinds of cultures have succeeded in America, right? I mean, there's Asians getting disqualified from Harvard because they're trying to what do you call it? Negative action? What's the opposite of affirmative action? And then there was a big lawsuit at Harvard about that. So there's different kinds of cultural loadouts that are more successful and others are less successful. But the Jewish cultural loadout, no question, seems to be one of the more successful ones in the melting pot in America. And so a lot of our most vaunted institutions are looking for anti-Semitism. And then if you're the high school kid that wants to get a reaction from the newspaper, all you have to do is scratch that swastika into the piece of playground equipment, and boom, now it's a big news story. And anti-Semitism. But it's just based on the fact that we're so susceptible. You can just get such an easy reaction. And then there's just the good old fashioned anti-Semitism that's always exists. So there's so many different avenues. There's so many different layers to that wedding cake. I'm wondering how much. What definitely does not seem like a layer in this cake is that the hyper woke progressive college kids on these campuses are actually closeted anti-Semites, and despite their strenuous inclusion of people from all stripes and walks of life on the anti-Semitism question, they're just uniquely hateful of Jewish people or something. It doesn't make the first bit of sense. What's really going on is they're criticizing the actions of the Israeli government, as you're saying, and so many of our media apparatus would love for us to conflate that with the worst excesses of the Hitler regime, and it's just not like you said it. The knockdown argument is Netanyahu is propping these people up. He's using the actions of the extreme actions of Hamas to deny the rest of the body of Palestinian people any human rights, to avoid any kind of a two-state solution where now Palestinians have representation in the UN or all of the things that come attendant with actual statehood for the Palestinians. So you just have this stateless population existing within Israel's borders. They have no political rights, and they're now that civilian population is being wiped out with the aforementioned actions of Hamas as the justification. But there's no suggesting that Israel would be, if there was peace, suggesting Israel, if they had their way, would not wipe out the Palestinian population is a highly dubious claim, considering that Netanyahu regime is using Hamas to wipe out the civilian populations as we speak. It is actually happening right now, Gad Saad. So I don't know. The guy, he seems like such a sharp guy, this Gad Saad. He was a refugee from Lebanon during the horrible war with Israel in the 80s. And so he was a Jew living in Lebanon, and so he just comes down. He just sees anti-Semitism coming out of the woodwork and feels unsafe going to. I don't know. There's something's missing here. Like maybe the man is just too close to the situation to be rational or objective about it. But like I said, after about 5 minutes, I was like, I can't continue the conversation just assuming that criticism of the Israelis is the same as anti-Semitism. It's hard to listen when that assumption has been made and not challenged, and now the whole conversation is based on that platform. It just makes for tough listening for yours truly. I don't know how you made it so far through that podcast, Brian.
Well, it is funny to listen to, I guess. I like to hear other people's perspectives. I mean, I guess you don't have to agree with our critique here, but you can't call us anti-Semitic.
I disagree. You have to agree with our critique. The Netanyahu bragging about using Hamas to deny the Palestinian people a two-state solution, I think, is the end of the argument. I think I've never heard a pro-Israel person grappling with that. It's always, the college kids are anti-Semites. It's always that. So, but you're right. Well, I don't think. I mean, I just think that just even the introduction of the slightest bit of nuance, you have to get beyond that. There has to be a way to criticize the Israeli state without, being an honorary member of the Nazi Party. It just can't be.
Well, the whole problem with the debate is when you do that, you become an anti-Semite, and so you can't have like a meaningful exchange. And I'm happy that the protests are like a problem for the powers that be, and the only way to like quell this whole issue is going to be to have like some kind of like terrorist attack or medical emergency. some kind of disease or something.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll be nostalgic for the era in which the free speech of college students was having a meaningful impact on the political discourse.
Well, yeah, it could. I'm sure that all this is going to come to some kind of a wild head. But they had, so this past week's Bill Maher had Douglas Murray on there. Douglas Murray, the protege of Christopher Hitchens, one of these people who would be terrifying, one of these Oxford dons whom it would be terrifying to debate. And he's on there, making the pro-Israel case and not once mentioning Netanyahu using, propping up Hamas to avoid having any kind of a two-state solution. It's absolutely wild.
Well, I guess if you're like a pro, Israeli person, I mean, what you're gonna say is he doesn't actually do that. But I mean,
didn't he transfer money and didn't actually happen in Qatar? I mean, can't you actually look at the details? I mean, there's no way you can. The man, I think there's actual transfer of funds that you can date to a specific date or dates. And then I think there's also him bragging about it. I mean, it's going to be a tough one to get out of, given how robustly reported on this thing. I have a friend who is from the small African, from the Horn of Africa, the small East African country of Djibouti. He says everyone knows that outside of the U.S. It's just here people don't understand. It's really interesting talking to him. He had French schooling. Right? He speaks French, Arabic, English. His list of languages is long. But they study Marxist economic thought alongside all of their other economic subjects, right? It's like he has real trouble. The man he comes from Djibouti. He went to college in Morocco and in Spain, and in France, and now he moved to the U.S. in 2020, right? So he's looking at all this like a brand new, like a fresh baby deer, without any and he's like he just can't. He always expresses how brainwashed the American population is, and this is one of the examples that he'll bring up. Like everyone knows that outside of the U.S. Very odd. So we also had Stormy Daniels on Bill Maher, or at least he was talking about her. He had brought out even Bill Maher, the man who got sued by the Donald. Remember that? And so he's got this personal vendetta against Donald Trump, but he ran down the list of the Donald legal proceedings, all of which were not going well. If you were rooting for the Donald to be clapped in irons, and removed from the 2024 election, and that the only case that had any promise going forward was the Stormy Daniels case, and that one was going deplorably, according to Maher, because he played a clip from 2018 of Stormy Daniels on the Bill Maher show, and she's saying, I'm not a victim, I'm not in the Me Too movement, this is all consensual, but now she's walking that back and making it seem like, this is a rape adjacent situation, trying to up the stakes in the lawsuit. This woman's just an unreliable witness, and she also, of course, signed a letter giving her solemn word of honor that she and the Donald had not had sexual relations, which is, it's going to be uncomfortable for her side to explain why she would. You obviously, so then you're lying, and so.
Well, I saw a clip on Twitter. It was from CNN, and a guy on CNN was saying that apparently Stormy owes $500,000 to the Donald from some court judgment, and she's just refused to pay, which kind of makes her an unreliable witness. She says that she hates the Donald and stuff. And so, I don't know. The thing about the Donald is it always, seems like he's about to be impeached or whatever. And then he just isn't. It's happened for it's been going on 8 years now, right? And so, if the Donald actually gets thrown in jail, well, at least we can be done with this crazy saga. So that I don't know. I guess the Dems or the establishment or whoever had they'd better pull this off, or the Donald's gonna if they don't kill the beast now, then it's gonna be a problem, right?
Yeah. This is their but I think obviously the more that they bring up these trumped up political charges on the Donald, trumped up, being a if you'll forgive the pun there, we are all allowed to know. There's a Twitter account called Nancy Pelosi Stock Tracker, which because she has so much money, she has to make SEC filings every time she does a stock move, and so 30 days after all of her moves in her portfolio are published 30 days after the fact, so it's just a matter of public record. And so you can there's I think Unusual Whales is even offering a Nancy Pelosi. You can buy you can mirror her moves, and she's a public servant who gets paid whatever they get, 100 and whatever, $200,000 a year, but she's become a multi-millionaire through these stock. It's like obviously insider trading, or having classified documents improperly. I mean, everyone knows that Biden and Hillary are guilty of that, and using campaign funds for the wrong thing, and misclassifying campaign funds. Like it's like the Donald's a sleazy businessman. Obviously, he's going to be guilty of any number of crimes. There's no question about that. The dude's like obviously not an upstanding citizen. But I mean, we just can't help but notice that none of the legal problems of any of the other establishment politicians end up with him in court like this. And so the more they prosecute the Donald, the more popular he becomes. It's been nothing but push polls in the wrong direction for the Dems.
Well, you see, the Donald is an agent of Moscow.
Yeah, he's uniquely a unique threat, which is an argument that the more the Donald hangs around the political establishment, and the more he's already been president for 4 years, the more dubious that claim seems. But man, so the Donald, I guess, and RFK are both going to speak at the Libertarian Convention in a few weeks, and the RFK is trying to challenge him to a debate. Have you seen all this madness there?
Well, I've seen RFK calling for a debate, and I did see they were both going to speak there.
Yeah, of course the Donald's going to have to duck that, right? I mean, this is well, that would be quite the feather in RFK's cap.
Yeah, well, the Donald doesn't want to legitimize RFK.
Yeah. But the best part about it is that no one cares about Biden. He's not even part of the thing. It is just not relevant, but that's very interesting. So I guess that's about all the news that's fit to print on the Palestinian front and on the exciting presidential election. So I'm ready to move on to this movie about modern monetary theory that came out recently. Brian, unless you have any closing thoughts on the exciting world of politics, or international or domestic.
Well, I mean, the only other thing is that they're just putting out this bit about RFK having his brain eaten by a worm.
Yeah, that sounds gruesome.
I mean, they're like trying to create this Howard Dean moment for RFK.
Yeah.
Although the establishment obviously does want RFK, they want to take support away from Trump. So I don't know. I think that it seems like the narrative has already died down.
Yeah, I saw RFK tweeting about, he said he would be willing to eat brainworms as a handicap. He willing to go into the debate with a brainworm handicap, making all kinds of jokes about it. I think that's the right tack. I mean, it does sound terrible. I wouldn't want a worm eating my brain. That sounds brutal. But there's no question that RFK seems more mentally facile than either of his opponents. I mean, you're not going to be able to paint RFK as having some mental defect. When Joe Biden can barely speak, or walk, it's not gonna fly.
Yeah, like if RFK is hampered by his brainworm, then Biden should definitely be up for a debate against him, right? But that dude is
certainly not. No, it's too bad because obviously all three of these candidates are in lockstep as far as I can tell on the Palestinian front. But other than that, there'd be a lot of daylight for RFK to score points on either the Donald or Biden because they've done useless, corrupt things. The Biden has a lot of guilt on the COVID front. Let's not forget this is Operation Warp Speed guy who brought us the vaccine. And let's not forget Kamala Harris at the VP debate saying she'll never take the Donald's rushed vaccine. It's almost too comedic to even you can't write stuff like that. It's just bizarre.
I guess the other thing just on the news front is, we did have this solar storm or whatever. Did you see any of the Aurora Borealis on Friday?
I didn't. Did you go out and have a look at it? Was it visible?
Yeah.
Wow, I wish I'd gone out then.
Yeah, you kind of need to be like at a low lights place to see it. But Brett Weinstein was tweeting about how we should be concerned about this, and I don't know, it was a big nothing burger. I didn't notice. My cell phone did not slow down, and there were no interruptions or anything. And so I don't know, a swing and a miss from Brett Weinstein, I'd say.
Doesn't mean there. It's like if you just because you got hammered drunk and drove home from the bar and made it in your garage, it doesn't mean it wasn't safe or your behavior wasn't risky.
I guess I was just hoping that this solar. It seemed like a big to do for a hot second there. Like if there was like some noticeable impact on like the way that our electronics functioned or something, like that would be interesting. I guess.
Well, I was hoping for the Fight Club wipe the entire economic slate clean and start from scratch scenario. And I'll echo your sentiment. I am so tired of nothing burgers. Let's get the movie started. I'm tired of these previews.
Yeah, well, that would be really interesting, but it doesn't seem like there's any chance of that happening.
More's the pity.
All right. Anyway, that's all I got.
there is a growing movement of within economics. These are heterodox economists, meaning that they are opposed to the status quo that has the depressing status quo that has settled like a funeral pall over the dismal science of economics. And the best known name is Dr. Stephanie Kelton out of the University of Kansas City, although I think she's now at University of New York Stony Brook and also at the New School. But all of the big names of the modern monetary theory they all coalesced in the 2000s around the University of Kansas City. And so Stephanie Kelton has a book, of course, which you can read, but they made a documentary, the thing I loved about this documentary is that they interviewed the lights of the current economic orthodox, so like Obama's economic advisor, or this other guy who said he thought he had the record for most congressional testimony at 350 sessions, going before Congress and explaining economic matters. And the MMT person behind the camera asked them some basic questions, and they just have no idea. I mean, you can just tell, and like it's embarrassing. Like they asked one guy, so the Federal Reserve on their balance sheet is currency in circulation listed as a liability, and the guy's like, no, it's not listed as a liability. Well, actually, I don't really know, and he does a whole bunch of dithering and thinking. And meanwhile, they're just showing you just Google Federal Reserve balance sheet, and then you can just see it on the liability side, highlight it, boom, no problem. It's it doesn't the distinction won't matter so much for this podcast, but it's interesting to note that the people who occupy the highest chairs in the economics field have no idea what they're talking about, and let's just leave it at that. In other words, in this documentary, they brought in their supposed critics and just exposed them. And it must have been, those guys must be, some of it was really embarrassing. I mean, some of those guys must be really unhappy that they are in this documentary, but they must have signed a release beforehand and nothing they can do about it. So to kind of understand, Jon Stewart had an interview where he was berating Larry Summers, who's one of the people who, Larry Summers, he was like one of the top guys in the Clinton White House and one of the top guys in the Obama White House. He's one of these aforementioned economic lights. And Jon Stewart's interviewing him about the recent situation with stubborn inflation. Like the Fed is obviously, here we sit in 2024, the Fed has raised rates to try to combat inflation. But what that really means is that we're going to make it harder to start a business, and so that means that businesses are going to need fewer employees. So raising the interest rate, really, the way that it combats inflation is by throwing people out of work, which is it's very telling about the class-based nature of our society that this is the tool we use when the economy runs too hot and we can get too many dollars chasing too many goods. So the main thrust behind Stephanie Kelton's movie Finding the Money is this idea that the government, being the issue of currency, has no need for our tax dollars. That's the part that you have to realize. Like it used to be the case that the colonial governments, like Virginia, would issue letters of tax credit. Right, if you build this road, we'll give you this letter of tax credit. And we only accept these letters of credit in tax. So everyone in Virginia owes us these letters of tax credit back. And the only way you can get letters of tax credit is by doing things for the government, like building roads, infrastructure, building piers, whatever. The government uses this as money, and they because they only accept their own letters of tax credit back, that means that everyone has to get involved, and that makes those letters of tax credit an exchangeable currency. But obviously, every time when it came to be tax season, the government would collect their taxes from everyone. They'd collect these letters of tax credit. They would just burn them, right? They would just destroy them. And that's really what happens, economically speaking, with your tax dollars. They're just going right into an oven. Right? All the tax money, the federal government creates money by spending it into existence on military or infrastructure or Social Security or whatever it may be, and then all the taxes that get collected is really just destroyed, in the sense that when you pay back a loan, the currency gets destroyed and the debt gets destroyed. That's the double entry accounting equation that really happens behind the scenes. And so once you realize that the government has no need for your money, well, a good example is this. They showed a bunch of the old World War II footage, like the newsreel footage, about selling treasury bonds, right? And the whole point of selling people think of the government selling treasury bonds to finance World War II, right? That must be that was my impression of it up until this movie, right? You buy these war bonds to help finance the war in Europe, right? The government's trying to raise money. But really, the government prints all the money it needs for the issue is not getting money, right? Money is like dollars are analogous to inches or degrees of temperature. There you can have as many degrees or inches as you need to properly measure whatever the thing you're measuring, right? There's not a restriction on the number of degrees or the number of inches or the number of whatever minutes, whatever the unit of measurement is. The real issue is inflation, and so the war bonds were meant to. The government was spending all this money to transform the economy into a war economy, and the goal of the war bonds was to remove money from circulation to prevent inflation, right? So people have all this extra money. They don't want people bidding up the prices of limited goods on offer at the department stores or where have you. And so buying they showed all of these film clips from World War II, and the buying of the war bonds was about not taking more than your share. Don't delay your purchases. Don't spend as little as you possibly can so we don't get an inflation on. And that's what the war bonds were all about. They were about taking people's extra savings, soaking that up, and then giving them a little bit more money back later so they could consume more later. But we want to delay consumption to avoid inflation was the idea behind the war bonds. And it really puts things into a different perspective. Like, the national debt clock, Brian, you must have seen it. There's on billboards. There's a famous one in New York City and has the number of dollars that we've borrowed. Right? The question becomes why are we borrowing money from rich people? When we could easily print the money, why are we paying rich people interest? Now, my own contention is that it's a little bit like the sale of indulgences during the Middle Ages, just to get people to believe in this economic paradigm. Anyone who doesn't believe in it is a heretic, and that keeps the money flowing to the rich people. But really, when it's really a misnomer, like there's a lot of the main contention behind the modern monetary theory is that all of our money that gets created is created as a debt, and so the national debt is really more of a money. It's really more of a measure of money in circulation than it is like an actual debt. So in other words, you could just in the movie they show the debt clock and they replace the word debt with savings, right? The point is, if the government runs a surplus like it did during the Clinton era, then that means that savings in the private sector is going down. So private savings and government debt are two sides of the exact same coin. Right? The Clinton administration running a surplus it tells you that the dot-com crash is on the way because all of this money is pouring out of the private sector and back into the government. Right? That's what the Clinton budget surplus meant. Whereas if the government spends at a deficit, then you're increasing private savings. If the government spends at a surplus, then they're drawing down savings in the private sector. So the national debt is just a measure of all of our savings in the private sector, and that's really all that it is. And we should be happy that the savings per person is going up, right? The debt countdown clock to doom has like a per family number or per individual and per family, and you're like, wow, my family owes hundreds of thousands of dollars, but really, what you're really just talking about is the amount of average savings that across every household in America. Now, most households don't have $100,000 in savings. It's like corporations and rich people skew the number badly. But it really is. Watching this movie really, for me, it's like flipping a switch or putting on a different pair of glasses. Right? You see the way economic works in a totally different way, a heterodox way or a heretical way, and it really shows the religious nature of our economic convictions. Obviously. I'm always on this podcast banging on about how the Caesars ran society during the time of the Roman Empire, and how the popes ran society during the medieval era, and how bankers have run society during the modern era, and that the bankers are the priestly class they project a reality that has us all living in a paradigm where we need to curtail public spending. Every time there's like student loan forgiveness or Social Security, it needs to be bumped up, or we need some infrastructure projects, whatever the thing is that's good for people, right? You get a lot of moaning and complaining about we can't afford it, right? How are we going to pay for it? But then whenever we need a war or lowering the tax cuts for the wealthy, you'll never hear that language, right? So we have this whole ideology that's designed to keep us. That's designed to manufacture consent for tax cuts on the wealthy and on corporations, and that will stop us from spending our money on infrastructure, on welfare, or public support, or anything that actually helps people. And so it's interesting to see the way in which obvious economic concepts like the national debt, being the national. So when you sit down and think, they have graphs that show like all the savings. There's like the analogy they use is like if you look at a lake from one side of a lake from the other, you can see the trees on the other side of the lake reflected in the water. So you get trees pointing down in the reflection and then trees pointing up in real life, right? So there's like the national debt graph of our debt going up, and then or a graph of the deficit every year, with some years being surplus, like the Clinton years, there's a surplus there. And then there's a shadow to that graph where the savings rate of all the money that's actually in the economy. And you can just see where savings and national debt are just perfect reflections of each other. Go ahead, sorry.
All right. Well, so it makes sense that it'll be like borrowing money from rich people at interest for the government, obviously. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But you're saying if the government didn't run out of deficit, then that means that we're going to have an economic collapse.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a debt-based currency. That means that all that are you could have a commodity-based currency that's backed by gold, right? An asset-based currency, but we have a debt-backed currency where almost all the money in circulation comes from lending activity, from fractional reserve lending, right? If Bank A has $100,000 in his vault, and they're going to loan out 90,000 of those dollars, and then those $90,000 are going to go in other bank vaults, and then 90% of that money is going to get loaned out. So 3% of our money supply is actually minted by a central authority. The other 97% is all. There's no physical currency. It's all bank deposits on paper. They don't actually exist, and they're called into existence from lending activity. Our currency is an IOU from the Federal Reserve Bank. It's money that the Federal Reserve owes. It's like if you had a supermarket and the supermarket. Suppose you gave IOUs to everyone around town. People come and do this service for you. Maybe they babysit your cats or mow your lawn, and you give them an IOU. But then there's so many IOUs from Brian floating around that the local Hannaford starts accepting them. Right? That's what the Federal Reserve money is. It's a debt-based currency. Versus what you could do is have a bunch of people trade in their gold or silver bars for notes for IOUs, right? Then you would have an asset-backed currency, but that's not how we function because there's not enough gold for the U.S. economy to function as it does. We need many more reserves than there are actually can be backed up by gold or silver, many more bank deposits. So we have this debt-based currency that's not constricted by the number of assets out there, and that's how we operate. And so it's just very interesting to know. So then worrying about so that means that every dollar in circulation is a liability on the Fed balance sheet, right? Every dollar that you the $10 you have in your pocket and the $10 I have in my pocket is $20 of liability on the Fed's balance sheet. It's an IOU, and it's just very interesting to note that if it's the liability on the Fed's balance sheet is the asset on your and my balance sheet, right? So talking about the national debt is what you're really talking about is domestic savings. And so we shouldn't, the amount of hand-wringing that goes on about the national debt. Now, we can't pay interest to rich people, right? That we create this whole market by I always compare it to like a multi-layer wedding cake where there's like the rate that government bonds are trading at is like the rate that the Fed targets. And that rate creates a whole market where we're going to say that zero risk is worth 5% or whatever the Fed's targeting. And so corporate bonds, slightly more risky, like Disney's probably going to pay their debts, whereas the Fed will always pay its debts because it has the money printer. Disney will probably always pay its debts, and then you get some middling companies that are likely to pay their debts, and then you get the penny stocks and the junk companies that probably won't pay their debts, and you have to price if you're going to sell that debt, you have to price the risk accordingly. So a crappy company is going to have to borrow money. It's going to be much more expensive than if a credit-worthy company like Apple or Disney wants to borrow money. So we have this whole paradigm where things get slightly more expensive every year because we target a certain inflation rate. The Fed does, right? They're targeting an inflation and an unemployment rate with their interest rate. That's meant to target a certain inflation rate so that people don't put money in their mattress, right? The idea is that money in a mattress slowly loses money every year, so you have to gamble it in the great casino, and this keeps Wall Street going, week after week, day after day, month after month. You have to, in order to not lose 3% of your money every year, you have to invest it in a casino, and prices just gradually. Versus in the 19th century in America, prices gradually were ticking down because we were building factories and creating economies of scale so that you could move widgets, for less dollars per widget. And we just, since the advent of the Federal Reserve in 1913, been stuck in a paradigm of gradually raising prices. And there's no need of it. We could run the economy any number of different ways. But we have this belief that this is the one right way for people to live. It's like a religious belief that every religion has. And people who are arguing from outside that paradigm are heretics, right? They're crazy people. And that's what people will. You can see they have all in the movie. They've got all kinds of the movie again. It's called Finding the Money. In the movie, Finding the Money, they actually have people from the White House press corps like mocking modern monetary theory. The old Mahatma Gandhi had the saying: first they ignore you, then they make fun of you, then they fight you, and then you win. Those are the 4 steps of political progress. And so it's interesting to see they've got clips of sober people with ties on speaking from podiums with the White House seal on it, talking about how ridiculous and crazy modern monetary theory is. But then you get those same people, you start asking them a few questions, and it turns out they've got no idea what they're just spokespeople with no understanding of what they're promulgating at all. So anyway, fascinating film. Everyone should go and check out Finding the Money. It was filmed in 2023. It only just dropped a couple weeks ago. You can find it on YouTube or wherever.
Well, I mean, no doubt there's some kind of cult going on. I don't know. I guess I'm not a super economist and whatnot. I think that certain ideas, I mean, it's a self-propagating system. And so, I mean, it's the most successful system so far. I mean, it doesn't mean it can't be improved upon. And, it is a bit of a giant fugazi. But I mean, like you wouldn't expect like Christianity necessarily to be like, even like the bastardized version of Christianity that's kind of become is still like self-propagating, and it like there's all these like morsels in Christianity that like Jordan Peterson has like sussed out that I was like completely oblivious to back during like the New Atheist phase and whatnot. And so I mean, obviously, we have this crazy like American cult going on with all kind of Masonic imagery like on our dollar and around Washington D.C. and stuff. So yeah, I mean, you're getting into the nuts and bolts and saying, it's a big fugazi, and well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it is. Even though the mechanics of it all are a bit above me, like, it just seems like we should not borrow money from rich people. I mean, I guess probably what would make sense is to have like a gold-based dollar, but that doesn't allow for like the expansionism needed to fight World War II. I think is the whole problem.
Yeah. Well, we should all you do is just print the money versus borrowing it off the rich, right? Easy to solve that problem. Just create the money. You don't have to borrow it. Which is really what they do, right? The bond auctions are all performative, right? They are printing the money, right? When it comes time to send trillions of dollars to the Ukraine, they just print the money and credit whatever defense contractor. Whatever defense contractors won the bid to blow up brown people in the Middle East, and so they just create the money out of thin air, and then we just have a certain amount of bond auctions every year, and there's not a 1-to-1 relationship there at all. It's all just a fugazi, like you say.
When did we get off the gold standard? Wasn't it after World War II?
Yeah, we were. So World War II had the Bretton Woods system just down the road in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. There was a big conference where all the leaders of the free world got together, and they all decided that we're going to have this Bretton Woods system where the United States patrols the waterway, becomes the military power that protects the entire world, and then we're going to use the dollar as the world reserve currency, and there's supposed to be a brick of gold for every dollar, in circulation, a certain amount of gold for every dollar in circulation.
Right.
And it was Charles de Gaulle who realized, and then as the Marshall Plan and as Europe rebuilt, so much money was borrowed from the United States that Charles de Gaulle started to figure, wait, there's no way the Americans actually have this much gold, right? They're just printing money without any gold backing it at all. And so Nixon in 1971 closed the gold window. No longer will we allow the redemption of dollars for gold bricks, says he, and that's the way it's been ever since. And so there's been no practical cap on the amount of dollars that can be printed at all since then. Very interesting.
crazy that they actually managed to pull off World War II. Then, yeah, still on the gold standard.
Yeah. Well, they had real constraint. That's why they were worried about. That's why they printed all of those war bonds. Because they don't want people spending the real dollar. They want to get those dollars out of circulation.
Yeah. Well, I think the growth that we have now just is cancerous in nature, and that's why you got people have cancer in their bodies, but you've got like these homeless people and all this like waste and pollution and I don't know, like sprawling suburbs, or not suburbs, but whatever it is, this kind of sprawl that you see as you drive into like
sprawl.
New York City.
Ugh, yeah.
Cancer, man. It's not. You can see, like, obviously the system allows for like rapid growth, but it's not like a harmonious growth, is it?
Well, we've faked a lot of growth, I feel like, too. Trying to pretend that we're growing when we're not really. We've talked about imputed rent many times on this podcast, but like the way we calculate GDP is geared towards faking growth, right? When your landlord puts up your rent by $1,000, well, that's an increase in GDP. That's counted as economic growth, but it's not really, right? Really, it's choking out potential growth. All of this money that when we're going to pay $780 billion this year, that's more than defense we're going to pay that much interest to rich people this year. Well, first of all, that's inflationary, of course. You're printing that much money and giving it to rich people. That's not good. But then owing that much money, like paying that much interest, chokes out the regular economy. Having monopolies where people charge monopoly rent, like there's not enough. Like there's monopolies or near monopolies where there's just not enough. The more people have to pay in rent, the less money we can pay the less money we have to spend in an actual economy where people actually produce goods and services versus getting paid just by owning an existing building. So the distinction between earned and unearned income is to the fore here. So much of our growth is really just inflation in asset prices, and we're not actually expanding the capacity of the economy to create products or to render services. And the more we have to pay the monopolists and the money lenders in interest and monopoly rent, the less and less and less, the more you'll get it. That's what the classic debt deflation spiral is. All of your money is owed to people who just own things and don't produce anything, and so no one can afford to produce anything anymore. And that's rapidly where we're heading. It's quite a shocking situation when you've got the system failure lens through which to view the current reality.
Well, yeah, I wonder, like, how do we get to like a more harmonious state with like nature? Like probably what would be cathartic, like we just have this crazy individualism that like makes it so that we can abuse our environment, and like this technology is like such a, like our cell phones and whatnot especially, we're just so like hyper individual focused, and it's no wonder that like there's all this like anxiety and depression and whatnot. And you can be sure that like Native Americans, I'm sure, didn't feel that way. And if you're like a rhinoceros or some creature in nature, you must just live in the state of harmony with nature, and you probably just don't have the same kind of sense of individuality that we've cultivated here. And so I don't like, is technology like actually like our salvation? Like the technology is creating this abundance, but I mean, is it really like, is technology gonna like bring us harmony? Like, or is it just gonna promote individualism? And I don't know.
Well, you got to uncouple technology from the train car of profit seeking. Right? It's like happy people are not good consumers, right? You have to inflame people's sense of individuality so they'll keep up with the Joneses, or so they'll feel insecure about their appearance or feel like they're missing out. You have to, in other words, the best way to stimulate buying behavior is to incept unhappiness in the minds of people, because satisfied people aren't going to need to buy anything. If you're satisfied, you're not going to you're not going to be swiping your credit card. And so fomenting misery and discontent, and like you're saying, inflaming the boundaries between people so that you've got to get the new Mercedes because your neighbor's got the new Mercedes. I mean, the keeping up with the Joneses thing is, all of that is weaponized against us, and you can just see the Even just if you expand that logic no further than the social media space, where it's all about capturing as much of your attention as possible, maximizing your engagement with each individual app. It's just a catastrophic recipe for mental health, and you can just see the demolition of the mental health of an entire generation of the crew behind us, the Zoomers, the cohort coming up after us. Everyone knows their mental state is in a state of utter collapse, and I think social media is got to be the biggest contributor to that set of misery, for sure, right? Ugh.
So are you in on Neuralink or out?
I don't know. Neuralink, that's an interesting one. It would be so nice to just download languages into your brain, like on the Matrix. When Trinity needs to learn how to fly that helicopter, she can just download she can just become an expert at piloting that helicopter in a matter of seconds. But I don't know. Maybe that's the future, and a fusion with the machine world is inevitable. But it seems grisly. I guess the one guy who has the Neuralink in had complications go wrong, and connections are retracting or burning out, or I don't know. Maybe once it's a mature technology, it'll be just what the doctor ordered. But I don't know. It seems like it could be. We've got to correct our relationship with the slider of the trade-off between public good and corporate profit. We've got to correct our relationship with that slider before we go into Neuralink. It's bad enough with just the cell phone. Neuralink will be a whole nother level of misery if it's meant to monetize your attention and keep you going round and round, and to stimulate buying behavior versus trying to be of service. And Facebook could really be a utility where people keep up with their high school friends and long lost relatives, but instead it's how many ads can we cram down people's throat? How long can we keep eyes on this app for? How long can we keep people from living their life? And so we need a fundamental correction to our relationship to the public good versus corporate profit trade-off before I'm willing to go down the Neuralink path. But maybe it's the future. Maybe it's the post-modern future. Once we get, once the capitalist system of production yields to another system that takes that balance of nature into account, that where living harmonious and human happiness and all of the things you just mentioned are one of the factors to optimize, rather than just profit, and that's all we care about, and it's the only juggling ball we have to work with is just profit. We got to get a few other juggling balls in the act to make it interesting, and to make these corporations serve a social versus an anti-social purpose. Yeah.
The ultimate question is going to be, at some point, you are going to be able to download our consciousness into the Matrix or something, and you can choose some kind of technological eternal life, or you can just accept dying, right? And that's the ultimate question for the fate of humanity. It's how you tackle that, right?
Yeah. I guess you're right. Immortality, you could be achieved technologically, and hopefully it won't be a subscription service. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
All right. I guess I'd still have to say, from the stoicism side of things, I guess, all the crazy way in which society is being worn down to the nub, it does present the opportunity to see what's real, I guess. And probably what's real is not all this technological stuff, and it's not how much money you have. And what you got to do is there's something that you can cultivate, right? That's above all this madness, right? There's something about growing your ability to interface with this reality and not succumb to the crazy madness and the mind virus that's out there, right? And so it would be nice if we could readjust our slider and be living in this more harmonious state with nature, but also the desyncing, the unharmonious nature of the lives we live, I guess provides the opportunity to see what's real, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess that's the whole point of our spiritual journey, or our the reason why we're here, right? Yeah. If we were like a rhinoceros, just out in the wild, eating grass or whatever, and doing whatever a rhinoceros does, you just wouldn't have all this crazy awareness about what's going on, and the opportunity to suss things out and figure out what's real and what's not. So, it would be nice if we lived in a more economic and harmonious system, but that would also like we would just be like we'd be in the Garden of Eden though, which I mean I guess is like a paradise type place to be, but it also doesn't afford the opportunity for spiritual growth, I guess you might say, or whatever it is that we're doing here.
Yeah, there's some of the great magical concepts out there. One of them is the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites, and the alchemical journey, and another magical concept is closely related, right? It's like it's not really paradise you want to aim for, right? It's like the in times of great system failure, right? In the late Middle Ages or the fall of the Roman Empire, right? There is an opportunity there to, like, if you're living during fat and happy times, there's no real challenge, and there's no call to raise your consciousness to a new level of awareness. And so living in the sort of time we live in now is, it's like the bad times have this positive side of the coin where you have to pay close. You can't just believe what other people tell you. You have to pay close attention for yourself. You have to think for yourself. You have to, I guess, raise your consciousness. Or be sucked into the abyss. And so it's like you really do have to go through hell to get to. It's the journey that's going to make us happy. And without challenging times, without a worthy challenge, there is no journey. So it's kind of like the alchemical journey or the coincidence of opposites, where things have to get really bad but when things get really bad, it's an opportunity for us to get better. And so, I think that you're always banging the stoicism drum, and I think that has got to be the great theme of system failure, right? Yes, the situation is sliding like cheese off your pizza. It's not good, but also these are the moments of great opportunity, and so there's reason for optimism within reason for pessimism. So it's a point well worth making, eh?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I think this is usually a juncture where I invite folks to send us an email and let us know where our logic is flawed, or why we're rabid anti-Semites or honorary members of the Nazi Party or whatever for our opinions. Send us a note at not@substack.com, and if you do, we'll most likely read your contribution on the air and respond to it. If you want to check out some essays about these and a great many other exciting topics, you can also visit nop.substack.com and do some reading there. I think you'll find it will be quite entertaining. So with that, I guess, Brian, will bid our listeners a fond adieu until next week. Hope you all have a great week.
Alrighty.
Take care.